Hello, everybody. If you didn't watch our last blog post, it was called God is a Master Builder. I'm going to encourage you at this point to go back and watch that one before you watch this one. This is kind of a part 2 to that. We're going to take some of what we talked about there as kind of an introductory level, and we're going to build on a little bit more. So you might call this one God is Master Builder Part 2, if you will. In that video, what we discussed was I kind of used the example of a Lego airplane that my 9-year-old son had built. And I'd said, what would happen if you came downstairs one day and you found instructions written on the table, kind of handwritten instructions that showed you how to connect two pieces of Lego together, to snap them together. How would you think those instructions got there? And what happens if you came down the next day and now you find out there's even more instructions written, and the instructions, that first step you found was just step 1, and as now you've got more instructions, 2 through 47, whatever. And you follow those instructions all the way through, they show you actually how to build this really complex Lego airplane. How would you think that those instructions got there? And I had my special guests there, my daughter Sarah and her best friend Lorelei, and they kind of said, well, yeah, obviously somebody must have put them there. Somebody must have written those instructions out. And the point that we made in that video was that DNA, the DNA code we see inside the human beings, is basically a set of instructions. It's coded information. It's information that is an instruction manual on how to build a particular human being, how to make a Sarah, how to make a Lorelei, how to make a Ken Coughlin. Everybody's DNA is different in order to be a specific set of instructions. And the point we made at that video was just that when we see that, is that when we see that kind of specified information in any other context, we assume it must have come from a natural mind. And yet when we look at that kind of information in the DNA code, we don't make that assumption. At least a lot of people don't make that assumption. They try to say it developed somehow naturalistically, through some kind of natural materialism. That's as far as we took it in that video, just kind of say that there's kind of an inconsistency there, in that in other contexts we will say that, oh no, this must have come from some kind of intelligent mind. It's too specific, it's too complex. It's not just random chicken scratch on a piece of paper. It's it's markings that form into letters, which then combine into words in some language that are intelligible, and then those words put them together and they actually instruct you on how to build this particular thing. And when you see something that's that specific, you don't think that some animal just, some dog ran across it and those markings randomly appeared. You do think that someone did that intentionally, and some mind looked at it and said, okay, I'm going to give you these instructions. And yet we see infinitely more complex instructions in the human DNA code, and we don't think that that was put in there by an intelligent mind. There's an inconsistency there. Now, I wanted to build on that a little bit in this video, first of all by talking about a gentleman by the name of Stephen Meyer, M-E-Y-E-R. He wrote an article back in 2004. It was called The Origin of Biological Information in the Higher Taxonomic Categories. And what that article argued was, he said, when you see more complex organisms, all right, and when you go, according to macroevolution, we started as more simple organisms and then evolved into more complex organisms. The problem is that process requires an infusion of information, additional DNA instructions, so to speak, on how to create more complex bodily forms. And what he pointed out there is there's no current understanding or theory of naturalistic macroevolution that would explain where that information could come from. It's kind of like if you start out with instruction number 1 on our Lego example, well, where do instructions 2 through 47 come from? They can't just randomly just pop up. Someone has to infuse that information in there to tell you how to get from simply snapping 2 Legos together, which is more basic, which a lot of people can figure out how to do, and then how to organize them in such a way as to create the actual Lego airplane. And of course, the additional information that we see in the human DNA code is far more complex and far more complicated than what we see in just those instructions for that Lego airplane. And so that's a problem. That's a problem with modern naturalistic evolution, is where does this genetic information come from? You don't get this kind of information through random mutation, all right? You're not going to, for a variety of reasons, which I'm not going to go into here in the short blog post, that's not going to account for this infusion of new information. The other thing I want to illustrate, based on this Lego example, is I want you to pretend that I did this. Pretend I took a whole bunch of Legos, and I put them in a bucket, and I put a lid on the bucket, and I shook it up, and then I opened it up, and I pulled it out, and out pops the fully assembled Lego airplane. All right, how likely is that to happen? If I were to walk up to you, and I were to just show you the finished airplane, and I were to tell you that that's how I built it, would you believe me? Or would you be skeptical? Naturally, we're going to be skeptical in that situation because the odds are so astronomically overwhelming against something like that happening that we're not going to believe it. If I were to tell you that's how I built this airplane, you'd say, no, you didn't. You got instructions from the Lego kit, and that's how you put it together. And you'd be right, because that's how we do it. The odds, nobody's going to try to build an airplane over and over again by shaking it up in a bucket, all right? Because we know that's not the way to get it done. We're going to follow the instructions. Well, this Lego analogy, I want to move beyond the biological for a moment and go to the cosmological and ask you to look at the universe. And again, this is all just a matter of consistent thinking. The biggest problem I think a lot of people have with God, and when they are finding ways to say that God isn't out there, doesn't exist, or the science is somehow incompatible with God, they're being inconsistent in their thinking. They're thinking in one way, reasoning one way in one context, and not realizing that they're being hypocritical when they apply a different standard in the context of anything that applies to God. And the same is true here. When we look at the universe, all right, the universe is governed by a number of constants that are very, very precisely set. Think of it as if you were setting the temperature on the oven where you want to bake a cake, and the instructions say to preheat to 350 degrees. Well, if you were to set it to 325 degrees, then your cake isn't going to be cooked all the way through. If you set it to 375 degrees, then you're going to burn it. It's very, very important that you set that setting exactly where it's supposed to be. Well, that's what we see also in our universe. There are a number of constants in the physical laws of the universe that are set to an immensely precise degree. And they have to be set there, because if they vary even ever so slightly, the universe wouldn't allow for life, all right? And life would not be able to exist. To give you one example, the ratio of electrons to protons in our universe is set to a degree where the amount it could deviate, the amount that it could vary from where it's actually set is so precise. It's set to a degree of 1 to 10 to the 37th power. All right, 1 to 10 to the 37th power. Now, to explain to you how precise that is, how small of a variation that permits, Dr. Hugh Ross wrote a book, The Creator and the Cosmos, and he explained that setting like this. He said, cover the entire North American continent in dimes all the way up to the moon, a height of about 239,000 miles. Next, pile dimes from here to the moon on 1 billion other continents the same size as North America. Paint one dime red and mix it into the billions of piles of dimes. Now blindfold a friend and ask him to pick out the one dime, the one red dime. The odds that he's going to pick out the red dime are 1 in 10 to the 37th power. That's how precise, just this one setting, the ratio between electrons and protons, how precise that has to be set. There's virtually no chance for variation of that whatsoever. And it's not the only one. Depending on who you ask, you're looking at dozens or even hundreds of other settings that have to be set just, if not more precisely. The cosmological constant is an example. You've probably heard the universe is expanding. Well, the rate of expansion is also very, very precisely set. If it expands too quickly, then you're not going to be able to form, gravity's not going to be able to act on things, you're not going to be able to form galaxies, planets, things like that. If it expands too slowly, the universe is going to collapse in on itself. So the cosmological constant is what controls the rate of expansion of the universe, and that also has to be set very, very precisely. As a matter of fact, the degree of precision on that is 1 to 10 to the 120th power. So that's almost infinitely more precisely set than the ratio of electrons to protons. And that's just two examples that I've given you. And so what I ask you is to look at it like this. If you were to see that degree of precision in any other context, would you look at that and say, oh, it's just random? You want a more concrete example? Look at the Lego example I gave you. If I were to tell you that I made that airplane by putting a whole bunch of pieces, random pieces, into a bucket, shaking them up, and out popped the airplane, would you believe me? Would you honestly look at that and say, oh, okay, that's a plausible explanation? And that's what doesn't make sense. I'd argue, no, you wouldn't. And you shouldn't in that situation. You would approach my claim with a really healthy degree of skepticism. And yet, when we're looking at the naturalistic sciences and the naturalistic attempts at discussing the degree of fine-tuning the universe, why don't we approach that with even more skepticism? If we're to be rational in our thinking, if somebody comes to us and says, I think the universe was made without an intelligent mind behind it, we should be looking at that claim with the same degree of skepticism that you would be looking at my claim, saying that I made that airplane without the help of an intelligent mind behind it. You wouldn't believe me in the Lego context, so why do you believe someone in the naturalistic explanations of the universe? Here's the thing, what you'll see a lot of people in these contexts say is when you'll explain when they'll say, oh, the universe just came into being through naturalistic means, there was no intelligence necessary. Lots of times when I press somebody more on that, what they'll say is, well, this could be, maybe this happened, or maybe that happened, or this, that, or that. Well, it's the same kind of thing. When they start saying this could have been, or maybe this, the proper response to that is, where's your evidence that it actually happened? Even if I assume for the sake of argument that your explanation would result in the result that we're looking for, which many times it just wouldn't, they're not thinking it through. But even if I grant that for the sake of argument, where's your evidence that what you're saying as an explanation actually happened? Because, again, let's be consistent in our thinking. If I were to tell you, well, yeah, it's maybe the way I just happened to shake that bucket in such a way that the pieces came together in the right way and formed that airplane, are you going to say, oh, okay, well, maybe that's theoretically possible, so okay, we're done, I'm satisfied? Or are you going to look at me and say, well, wait a minute, where's your evidence that that actually happened? Because what you're proposing to me, it seems extremely implausible given what I know about how this type of precision usually comes about. In every other context I know, when I see this type of precision, I assume there was an intelligent mind behind it. You're asking me to abandon that belief that I have formulated reasonably based on every other context I've analyzed. So if you want me to abandon that and make this one exception to that rule, then you need to provide me some evidence that what you're saying actually happened, not just that it could have happened. Otherwise, I'm being inconsistent. I'm not applying the same degree of skepticism to your claim about the universe that I would apply to someone else's claim about the formation of a Lego airplane. And that's what we see in this type of thinking, this type of reasoning. People who generally say that science and Christianity or science and faith are incompatible, generally speaking, are being inconsistent in the way they apply their reasoning. And this is an example of that. Werner Heisenberg, which you may have heard of, he's one of the founding minds, I guess you might say, in modern quantum mechanics. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle is named after him. He said this. He said, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. But at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. And that is true. Lots of times people have a surface understanding of some of these scientific principles and they start to embrace atheism and say science and faith are incompatible. But if you really apply your reasoning fairly and consistently, and you dig deeper and get a deeper understanding of these scientific phenomenon, you will generally, a lot of people come to the same conclusion that Heisenberg did, is that, you know what, no, science isn't inconsistent with faith, science isn't inconsistent with belief in Christianity, it actually supports it to an astounding degree. All right, I hope this was beneficial to you all. Hey, do me a favor, if you like this video, go ahead and click the thumbs up button, give us a like here on the video, and it'd be really helpful to us if you'd go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. All right, thank you, God bless.